Hey, welcome. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more about the X-M5 and also answering some questions from viewers that I posted asking if people are interested in the X-M5, and if so, what questions do they have and what things do they want to see me test. It'll be pretty casual. Fun, probably stretching it. Lionheart4424 says, video autofocus seems to be decent in different quick tests. Also, quality of the Open Gate, if you can share your thoughts about it. So I made a video comparing the autofocus in the X-M5 versus the X-H2S with the latest firmware. Wanted to see if they were the same, if the X-M5 was better in some way, or vice versa. And I do think they're very similar. And there have been some pretty wild claims out there saying that the autofocus on the X-M5 was better than competing cameras, and I think that's wrong. The autofocus is okay. It's gonna be really good for the intended use case of this camera, which I think is content creators. It tracks well, it is sticky, and it's not about settings necessarily, and it's not about knowing how to use it, which that's important. Of course, you want to understand the different modes. I may have glossed over the importance of understanding the settings in your camera for the sake of time, but as you probably can tell in this video, I'm out of focus more than I wanted to, and that's because I was using the product showcase mode on the Sony ZV-E1, which is a mode that I don't typically use, and I didn't spend enough time testing it to figure out how to use it. So I'm out of focus more than I would like to be. But the camera is working as intended, I believe. Definitely take the time to understand how the autofocus works in whatever camera you're using. If that's the X-M5 in product showcase mode, understand how that works, whatever. As far as the quality of the Open Gate, it's fantastic. It is using the X-Trans4 sensor, so it's got the 26 megapixel sensor from the X-T3, X-T4, X100V, and the list goes on. And it's also using the latest processor from this current generation of cameras. There's no reason that the image quality won't be as good as all the previous cameras that have the same sensor and also have a lot of the same features as the current generation cameras. So the only limiting factor in terms of image quality would be the codecs and the bit rate. This camera only has a UHS-1 card slot. It is limited in terms of your codec and your bit rates. The best quality codec you can choose is H.265 422 10-bit. And the highest bit rate you can go is 200 megabits per second. But that is fine. That is more than enough. On my Sony cameras, I'm always shooting 4K H.265 100 megabits per second. And that's plenty. Long answer short, the Open Gate recording is amazing. Garrett Ware doesn't have a question, but a comment. He says, I'm so intrigued by this little guy. Some of the gimmicky features I've seen folks complain about actually seem fun and refreshing for what I'd imagine to be a competitor to Lumix's S9. And I agree, this camera has amazing capabilities for the price. I mean, it has amazing capabilities for cameras that cost much more than this. But then it has gimmicky or fun features on top of that, like the film simulation dial. I think, maybe a little gimmicky, and, maybe professional photographers don't need that and they wish the dial were something else. But I think for the target audience of this camera, it's a fun thing to have access to. People want to shoot straight out of camera photos, and it gives you, it shows you right on the screen what it's going to look like. You do have the vlog mode. I talked about that in my first impressions video. I think it is extremely useful. I wish they would introduce that or bring that to other cameras, even if it doesn't have the vlog on the dial, the vlog mode on the dial. I think you could have it in the menu, because it gives you access to a lot of things that you might want to have access to on the LCD screen, and it's touch enabled. And then lastly is the filter mode, which is just another photographic, sort of straight out of camera set of fun filters that you can apply to your JPEGs. You've got partial color in different color options. You've got toy camera, miniature, pop color, high key, low key, dynamic tone, soft focus, and I think they're fun. Kishan Sendlaskar asks, how good are the ergonomics with the 27mm pancake? Is it good for photography? And how does it compare to similarly priced X-T30 Mark II? So I don't have the 27mm pancake from Fujifilm, but I just got the TT Artisan 27mm f2.8. And this one is not as pancakey as the Fujifilm, but it's really tiny. And I can't actually imagine it being any smaller. This is extremely small. But yeah, this should give you an idea of what the pancake lens would be like on this camera. And if you are an EDC type person, you're looking for the smallest possible form factor, this is a great way to go. This is going to give you a 40 millimeter full frame field of view equivalent. So it looks kind of like a wide angle sort of lens, but it is more of a standard focal length. How good is it for photography? It's fantastic. Same sensor from previous generations flagship cameras and same processor as current flagship cameras. So in terms of the photo capabilities and the image quality, it's right up there with the best that you can get on APS-C. It only has one card slot, of course, so not really a professional camera if you need backups, etc. But come on, that's not really what you expect out of this, I don't think. It doesn't have an EVF. So in terms of how it compares to the X-T30 Mark II, I've never used that camera, but I would imagine in terms of the capabilities, they're going to be very similar. This one might even be better because it has the newer processor. Neither of these cameras has IBIS. I think the biggest difference between the two is going to be in the form factor. The X-T30 Mark II is going to be a little bit bigger, I believe, maybe have a little bit more of a substantial grip, and then it's going to have an EVF. So hopefully that answered your question. I don't really want to get too in depth because I've never used that camera, but just some of the obvious things. Mark Weimels, some small YouTuber, asks F-Log2 footage versus XH2S. Yeah, I already touched on this, and I've already filmed an entire video in F-Log2 with this camera and the XH2S, and I think they look essentially the same. Maybe the colors are slightly different, but that also has to do with the fact that I was using a Viltrox lens on this versus a Fujifilm lens on the XH2S. But yeah, I don't know that anybody would really be able to tell which was which if I didn't point it out. Yeah, and you have the same ability to turn down sharpness. You can turn down the noise reduction in camera on here, just like you can on the XH2S and the XS20. So you get a really, very sharp and very detailed image, but also something that looks a little less processed than you'll get out of, Sony and other types of cameras. Lena Elbert asks about battery life while shooting Open Gate. Someone tested it and says it hardly lasts 20 minutes. So I did a quick test. I shot in 6.2K, 23.98 frames per second, so 24, 422 10-bit, H.265 at 100 megabits per second. And I had eye tracking enabled. I was just sitting at my desk and had the camera over there tracking me and just let it run. And I have the boost mode enabled. So boost mode is a stupid option that Fujifilm has on all its cameras. It's like the performance of the camera. I think it's got 3 different parameters. Boost mode would be the high performance one, but also would be the most draining on the battery. So that was on. So all that, I got 1 hour and 13 minutes, which was the runtime of the battery. So the battery died and the camera never overheated. I didn't get a high temp warning. The ambient temperature in the room, I'm not really sure what it was, but it was probably between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's just one example. And of course, there's a lot of different variables that would influence the camera's ability to not overheat. I have the temperature threshold in the camera set to high. So if you don't do that, then of course it won't run as long. It will shut off faster. So maybe that was something that the person did, not setting the temperature threshold to high. But other things you can do, or things that will affect it, would be having the LCD flipped out. If you have HDMI plugged in, I found that that often makes cameras heat up faster. And then if you're powering it over USB, that might cause it to heat up faster as well. Lastly, I had a question about the burst rate. I don't remember where that question is, but can it shoot multiple photos in a row? And how does that work? And the answer is yes, it can. So in mechanical shutter, you get 8 frames per second. And then in electronic shutter, you get 20 frames per second with the full sensor, and you can also get up to 30 frames per second with a crop. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm in EF plus mechanical. If we go into the drive mode and move it to high, we get 8 frames per second. Here, let me show you the screen. Wow. Try not to drop it, and focus. That was a lot. The buffer slowed down, you could hear it slow down, and then it stopped, and then you can see that flashing light means that it's writing all those to the card. So you have to wait until it clears that before you can take photos again. I think that was a pretty decent amount of photos to be able to shoot with this little camera. And of course, your image quality settings will influence that as well. So I'm shooting large 3x2. I'm shooting fine JPEGs or fine HIFs plus RAW, and I'm shooting lossless compressed RAWs. So if you were shooting only JPEGs or you're shooting only RAWs, you could probably get more than that. But I do think that was plenty. The question was about blackout, and you can see when you take that first image, the screen does black out, but when you go into the high speed mode, it blacks out for that first image, but then it doesn't, the screen stays on after that. Using the filter mode, we'll do, okay, so that's in miniature. So if we go and use the filter mode, that takes longer to write to the card, and you cannot shoot in burst with the filter mode. You can only do stills. I just want to talk about a few more things that I have noticed. It is very bizarre that the I/O, most of the I/O on the camera is on the grip side of it. So you've got your micro HDMI and your USB 3 here. And then just above that, you've got your headphone, 3.5mm headphone out here. So if you're holding the camera, then you obviously cannot have anything plugged in. I think you could probably slide the cord for a headphone if you needed it, if you needed to monitor audio while you're recording, but you obviously cannot have USB-C and HDMI plugged into the camera while you're holding it, unless you hold it with your other hand only. So that's weird, I think. I'm sure there's going to be some aftermarket cages or something that maybe will have like a handle that will allow you to pass cables through. But it's an interesting decision to not have it on this side. Also, the other weird design choice, I think, was having the 1/4" thread all the way over here. And you can see the battery and SD card door is right next to it. So you literally cannot put even the smallest tripod plate on this camera and get access to the battery and the SD card. It's really weird that they didn't move that over. The little light here on the front, which is for the camera getting focus, I think in low light situations, you can set that to a tally light. So I don't know, hopefully you can see that. This is the iPhone 12 mini. So hopefully that was helpful. I don't know, at least I answered somebody's questions, and keep them coming. If you got any more questions or comparisons or tests that you'd like to see on the X-M5, let me know. And I really appreciate watching the video, and maybe I'll see you in another.